Hi there. Welcome to Solving the PM interview. For this module, we're going to be tackling the failure product management interview question. So, what is the failure question? Well, you're going to need to be prepared to answer this particular question in the interview. Tell me about a time when you failed. This question will catch you off guard if you're not ready for it. It's really important that we prepare for tell me about a time when you failed. But before we dive into how to actually prepare for this, why do interviewers ask this question in the first place? Let me level set with you and say that product managers fail all of the time. We're always trying to take risks to improve the business. And many times those risks might not pan out. Many times things might fail either due to something that was in our control or outside of our control. And so we need to get comfortable with the concept of failing on the job. Here's the thing. If you've never failed before, then you've never taken enough risk. And you haven't taken enough risk, then you haven't driven enough upside for the company. And so if there wasn't any upside for the company to have, then they wouldn't need a product manager in the first place. So because companies are looking for upside, that's why they hire product managers, and they know that product managers are going to fail on the job. That is okay, it is expected. So don't feel bad when someone asks you to tell you about a failure, because they need to know how you're going to perform when you do inevitably fail on the job. And so the thing that an employer is scared about is not whether you'll fail or not. They know that you're going to fail. You're guaranteed to eventually fail on the job as a product manager, let me tell you that. The thing that they're actually really worried about is whether you're fragile or not. Because if you're fragile, that's a death sentence for the company. So let's talk a little bit more about what fragility is. The thing is, product managers are multiplicative, right? We are empowering our teammates to deliver more and more value over time. If your product manager is fragile, if they crumble under the slightest failure, they might wind up poisoning the entire company, right? A couple of things that I've seen happen with my own eyes. When there's a fragile product manager in place, they start blaming other people. And this blame game makes people very unwilling to work with the product manager. People start pointing fingers and stop working on how to fix the problem. And that can very quickly destroy a company's culture. Another thing that is really bad is a fragile product manager will typically deny that they failed in the first place. And if you deny that you're failing, you don't take the opportunity to learn from that failure. Product managers are expected to drive learnings across the organization every time there's a failure. And so if you don't do that, then you aren't actually serving as a product manager. Fragile product managers will sometimes commit fraud. They will make up numbers to make themselves look good, even though they had very clearly actually failed. And so that fraud might be very subtle. Product managers might happen to define metrics differently or cherry pick A/B tests that make their products look good rather than telling the whole truth to the company. And so, as you can very easily see, a fragile product manager can very much destroy a company because they get people to fight each other in terms of pointing fingers and having blame games. They stop learning and they prevent other people from learning from mistakes. And they might commit fraud, they might make up numbers, and that means that the company is no longer making real improvements. Rather, it's now lying to its investors and to its customers. And so that is why companies are very scared of hiring fragile product managers. And it's essential that you yourself are not a fragile product manager in the first place. And so before we continue, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to leave your ego at the door when you're working through the interview process, because you're going to be asked about a failure. And if you're not willing to talk about your real failure and to be honest and transparent to the interviewer, then you shouldn't proceed. Product management may not be the job for you. You need to be raw and honest and authentic in terms of identifying the things that went wrong so that way you can improve them, so that way the company is improving over time. So now I've talked about fragility and why it's so bad to hire fragile product managers. So if we know what companies aren't looking for, well, what are they looking for? What they're looking for is a capability called antifragility. What is that? Well, antifragility is the capability of improving every time there's a failure, right? In essence, as you fail, you learn from it and you get stronger and stronger over time, right? And so the thing is, companies are looking for anti-fragile product managers, where they take failures and turn them into successes because they're learning from it and preventing future failures from happening. Many times when I ask candidates, what is the opposite of fragility? They'll tell me that the answer is resilience. And the thing is, that's unfortunately not true. The thing is, resilient product managers are simply those who can tolerate failure. They can survive through failure. It's not enough that you are resilient and that you're willing to continue even though you failed. Rather, the thing that you need to do is you need to have a drive for improvement when there's a failure, right? It's not enough to be resilient when you fail. You need to be anti-fragile. You need to be driven to take that problem and turn it into a win. And so now we know that anti-fragility is what companies are looking for. They're not looking for resilience. So what are the different things that make up anti-fragility? Well, anti-fragility is something that comes naturally if you have these traits. First, if you're humble, you are able to identify your own mistakes. And if you're courageous, that means that you're able to accept the responsibility that came with making that mistake. Then if you're adaptive, that means that you have the ability to learn from the mistake that you've taken charge of and course correct. And if you're thoughtful, that means that you're going to try to find the root cause of what happened and then find that solution. And if you have drive, then you're going to go take those lessons and apply it to the whole company. And so while anti-fragility might sound like a very scary concept to try to pick up, the underlying components are not quite that scary. It's easy for us to train how to become more humble, where we accept that we do make mistakes and that we are going to identify these mistakes as something that we ourselves did. We can grow that courage to accept the responsibility that comes with making a mistake. And we can demonstrate that we can learn and course correct, and then take those learnings and apply them to the entire company. These are all things that we can work on tactically, and that will then grow into the strategic capability of anti-fragility. And so to summarize, when an interviewer is asking you the failure question, they're looking for anti-fragility. And by asking for anti-fragility, the employer is also able to assess you on all these other really positive key traits that they're looking for in a product manager. And that's why they love asking the failure question. And that's exactly why you should expect to see the failure question as you're working through the interview process. So now we know why employers are asking this question. They want you to demonstrate all the components of anti-fragility so that way they know that you're going to be able to rock on the job. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we come up with a structure for tackling this question when it does come up. So here's a framework that works really well for tackling the failure question. First, you want to provide context around that failure. Then you want to discuss the failure's impact on the company. You want to highlight how you contributed to that failure, right? What was your responsibility in causing that failure or in making the failure worse? And then you want to talk about how you mitigated that failure, and then share how you made your organization more resilient over time. And so one of the things that you'll notice with this particular framework is that we are demonstrating anti-fragility. We are identifying the problem. We are accepting that it is our responsibility that there was a problem, and that we're demonstrating that we know how to learn from it and to apply those learnings across the rest of the company, across the rest of the organization to make it stronger over time. And so with that, let's dive into the key steps of this framework. First, we need to provide context about the failure. You don't want to just launch into a rambling story and then the interviewer can't keep up. They weren't there when you failed. And so you need to make sure that you provide really clear context for what happened. Interviewers are testing to see that you know how to frame narratives, right? They want to see that you can bring people very quickly up to speed. And so this very first part of the framework will demonstrate to them that you know how to tell compelling stories. You know how to bring people up to speed very quickly. And again, this is a really critical skill to have, whether you're working with engineers, designers, executives, customers. Being able to bring other people up to speed is a really critical skill set to have. And so provide context around the failure. Frame the situation, what was going on and what happened. So we've now brought the interviewer up to speed on what the situation was, what was that failure. Now let's talk a little bit more about what that failure's impact was. So the thing is, we need to make sure that when we are answering this question, we answer with real, impactful failures. Why is that? Well, the thing is, you want to demonstrate to the interviewer that you can survive a catastrophic failure. The thing is, if you're just servicing a really tiny failure, it doesn't demonstrate to them that you know how to deal with really, really large issues. And so that means that they're going to be a lot less confident in hiring you. You want to demonstrate to the hiring manager that you have awareness and empathy for all of your stakeholders and that you understand the weight and the gravity of your responsibilities. So what you don't want to happen, you don't want to say, oh, well, a time that I failed was when I let a typo get into the homepage. A single typo on the homepage isn't catastrophic, right? It's something that's very easily fixed. And that impact is probably not even measurable. Whereas say that your entire product went down, right? It was totally inaccessible. Customers were seeing 404 errors, right? That is a meaty failure. That is something that we can actually really go talk about. Or say that you shipped some product that then broke everyone else's features and caused a lot of headaches for everyone. That is a really meaty failure to go talk about. And it's something that will demonstrate a lot of learnings from your experiences. So again, don't pick the tiny non-impactful failures. Typos don't count, right? Like small design mistakes don't count. you really need to go aim for something that actually changed a business metric, something that was noticeable by customers and something that was noticeable by executives, because the interviewer wants to see your track record in operating under these really high stress, high intensity situations. So now we've talked about the failure's impact, right? Not just its qualitative impact of what did it do to other people, but its quantitative impact. How did it actually hurt the company in measurable ways? So we've now set the stage. There was some failure that happened, and it was a meaningful failure to the company. Now it's time for us to take ownership. So let's talk about how we contributed to that failure. Did we cause that failure? Did we make that failure even worse? Because again, the question is, tell me about a time when you failed. So don't just talk about a company-wide failure and you had nothing to do with it. You need to have been a part of this story. To succeed in product management, you need to be able to control your emotions. You need to demonstrate ownership and humility, and you need to demonstrate that you're going to survive under really high stress, high intensity situations. And so you need to go ahead and discuss, these are the places where I actually owed responsibility, right? These are the things that I did that caused the failure to happen or to get worse. If this is your first time talking about a failure to an interviewer, one of the things that you need to watch out for is you want to make sure that you don't sound defensive or angry. The thing is, talking about failures is something that can be very emotionally charged, and I totally get it. It's something that's really uncomfortable to do. But if you sound defensive or angry, you're demonstrating to the interviewer that you don't have the emotional maturity it takes to succeed on the job. So again, don't play the blame game, right? Don't sound defensive, don't sound angry, talk about it dispassionately. But on the flip side, also don't beat yourself up over it. The thing is, I see a lot of candidates, they're trying to make themselves look like, oh, well, I'm really a team player. I'm going to take on a bunch of responsibility. But there is something called too much responsibility, where you try to take away other people's responsibility and throw it on yourself. And that's also not good for the company. Why is that? Well, if you excessively self-blame, what you do is you demonstrate that you don't understand the things that you control versus the things that you don't control. And that means that you're not a good product manager. It means that you don't know what levers actually matter. Say, for example, that a competitor shipped a feature and that you did not ship a feature fast enough to try to combat that competitive action. And you try to take too much responsibility and you say, oh, I should have never let that competitor launch in the first place, right? Like I should have been able to convince them to not launch that feature or whatever. That makes no sense. You don't control other companies. So make sure that when you are taking responsibility, you take responsibility of the things that you actually control and not things that you don't possibly control. So as we talk through how we contributed to the failure, whether we were the root cause or whether we made the failure worse, we need to talk about it dispassionately. So don't bring emotions into it. Be neutral and objective. Openly and humbly admit that you have flaws and that you made the problem worse. So that way you demonstrate the ownership, but don't take away the blame from other people. You need to also be able to identify what went wrong in other organizations and on other people, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to find out, well, what were the root causes and how do we fix these causes? So we've now talked about a meaty failure that really impacted the company, as well as our role in contributing to that failure. What comes next? Well, now it's time for us to talk about how we mitigated that failure, right? How did we fix the problem? So here's the thing. Failures aren't necessarily bad things overall, as long as you mitigate that impact and then you extract learnings from that situation. So what you want to do is you want to tell the hiring manager how you managed that crisis, how you mitigated that impact. What were the things that you did during the failure? How did those actions actually help the situation? And what were the alternatives? What would have happened if you didn't take those actions? And the reason why you want to talk about the actions that you took, how those actions helped, and what would have happened if you didn't take those actions, is because that helps the interviewer understand, oh, this is a really thoughtful product manager. They know the levers that they can pull and should pull during a moment of crisis. And so you want to talk about how you made the failure less bad, what specific actions you took, why you took those actions, and how those actions helped. What you don't want to do is you don't want to give a minute by minute breakdown of all the different things that you tried and the things that didn't work. The thing is, you really want to focus on the actions that you took that really made a positive impact, rather than talk through all the different stuff that you did and work through a live play-by-play, right? That's not the point of this interview question. The point of this interview question is, do you know what are the key levers to pull to make sure that a company survives a failure and then learns from it? So now we've talked about how you mitigated that failure. So you've fixed the problem, the company lives to fight another day. Well, what next? Now it's time to talk about the anti-fragility part, right? Up to this point, we've only been able to talk about resilience. We're able to fix problems when they come up, but we haven't talked about how to then make the company better after surviving a problem. So let's move on from resilience onto antifragility, the final part of our answer framework. We want to now talk about how we improved our organization so that way it weathers storms better, so that way it doesn't run into the same mistakes and it learns from its failures. The thing is, even though this section is last because it comes last chronologically, it's the most important part of the interview question. So again, you want to demonstrate that you're thoughtful and that you love learning, especially learning from mistakes. You want to demonstrate that you know how to diagnose the root cause, you know how to prevent future problems, and you don't just learn from it, you actually take action on those learnings. The thing is, by using failure to create strength, that itself is antifragility. So what you want to do is you want to talk about the strength that your organization gained because of the improvements that you made. And so this wraps up our framework for answering the "tell me about a time you failed" question. Now, back to thoughtful interview practice. How should we be practicing for this? Well, what you want to do is you want to go tackle this question a couple of different times where for one of them, you give yourself, let's say 20 to 30 minutes to answer the question. And in another version, you only give yourself 5 minutes to answer the question. So when you're doing the shorter version, you want to make sure that you're really concise when you're talking through all the different pieces. In the longer version, you want to be able to demonstrate that you can dig deep into surfacing insights, and you want to focus the majority of the conversation on that last part of how you improved the organization, how you took actions on learnings. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're able to tackle 2 to 3 different examples of times that you failed. What I mean is you don't need to surface 2 or 3 different ones within the same interview, right? That's too much. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a couple of different really solid failures that you get to talk about, so that way you can personalize your response to that particular interviewer or that particular company. As an example, say that you are applying for a product management role where you're looking to launch totally new businesses, right? You're not trying to optimize an existing product. Well, then you want to talk about failures where you launched features and they fell flat. Those experiences are a lot more meaningful to the interviewer in understanding how you're likely to perform on the job. And on the flip side, let's say that you're applying for a growth product management position, one where you're trying to grow the metrics, grow the numbers. Then you'll want to talk about a time where you totally screwed up in terms of picking a hypothesis and wasting resources in terms of trying to grow a number that didn't make sense. That is a much more meaty and impactful example that the interviewer is going to be a lot more interested to hear more about. Because again, it demonstrates your track record on the job in tackling a problem that really matters for them. And so again, take the time to practice this question, come up with 2 to 3 different examples of failure that you had, and make sure that you're comfortable talking about them, whether you only have 5 minutes to talk about it or whether you have 30 minutes to talk about it. By leveraging the thoughtful interview practice framework, you'll find that you get much, much better at answering this really scary question in a way that no other candidate is going to be able to match. And that way you're going to really shine in front of the hiring manager. So again, take the time to practice this question thoughtfully, work through different iterations, so that way you're comfortable talking about failure when no one else is comfortable. And that's really going to help you stand out versus other candidates who are applying for that role. And with that, that completes this module. See you in the next one.